In this video, we'll go over the basics of Python decorators. So we won't go into too many advanced examples here. I just want to do a quick video on kind of the basics of decorators and how they actually work. So if you're unfamiliar with decorators, what a decorator is the syntax is an @ symbol and then some sort of function name here. So for example, in the Django REST framework, we have @API_view. And this will add some extra functionality to our function to turn that function into a Django REST framework API view. And so you may be wondering how this actually works. And so let's go over some quick examples about how something like this would work. So the first thing to understand with decorators is all they're really doing is they're taking a function and adding some other functionality to it without actually modifying the function itself. So you can modify the function by adding this extra functionality without actually modifying the original function by adding a decorator. If that doesn't make sense, hopefully these examples will help clear that up. But the first thing to understand with Python functions is that they are considered what's called first-class objects, which means you can pass them around as arguments into functions like anything else. Just like you can pass an int or a string or anything else to a function as an argument, you can also pass a function as an argument. So for example, I can create a function, I'll just call it tests, and I'll pass an argument, which would be a function, and I can go ahead and just return that function. Now, if I create another function here, I'll just say get number or something, and this will go ahead and just return a number. We'll say 10. I can go ahead and call test, so I'll print out this result, and we'll call test by passing in get number and calling that there. Now what we'll do, if you come to the terminal here and we run python3 tutorial.py, we get 10. So what we're doing here is we're calling this test function, and this is just returning a function from the argument. So inside of this function argument, I'm passing in another function, and then inside this get number function, I'm returning 10. And so this is just returning this up to this, which is then reprinting it out down here. So it's just kind of a complicated way of really just calling this function inside of this function. And we can take that a step further and take this function and put it inside of this function. So in Python, you can create inner functions. So I can take out this function here. And now instead of just returning this, I can create an inner function right here that returns this number. And then inside of this test function, I can go ahead and just call get number as well. And now instead of passing in any arguments here, I can get rid of this. And now I have everything inside of this function. So I can call just test, save that. I come back here to my terminal here, and I run that again. We got an error on line 9. Oh, I forgot my closing parenthesis there. Let's go ahead and try that again. We're then getting none, and that's because we're not actually returning this function. So if I return get number here and run this again, we now get 10. So we're doing the same thing, but now we're putting everything inside this function. So I'm creating inner function, and then I'm returning that result for this test function. And then when we print out tests, we get this inner function result. And so another example, real quickly, if that doesn't make sense, we can create just sort of like another outer function. I'll call it outer function, and then I'll create an inner function. I'll call it inner function. Now let's put a print statement here. I'll say print from the inner function. And now here I can go and just call that inner function. And notice that this call, it's very important that it's outside of this function call here. So it's inside this outer function. And if I print outer function, we get that result from the inner function. And we don't need this print statement, but that's fine. Now, with Python, we have a certain scope of this inner function. So this inner function is not something you can use anywhere else. It can only be used inside this function because we're defining it inside this function. So if I comment this out here and I try to instead call inner function outside of this outer function, we'll get an error. So if we try running this, we'll get a name inner function is not defined. So if you create inner functions, you can only use them inside of the outer function. You can't use them anywhere else. So that's just an important thing to note there. But this sort of setup here is exactly how decorators work. We have some outer function that wraps an inner function. So let's go ahead and try a real world example about how these decorators work. So I'm gonna put a note here that this won't work, just so we know that this line here is not gonna work. But now I'm gonna go ahead and just comment out all this code, and down here, let's go ahead and create a more concrete example about how to use this as a decorator. So we'll start with creating an outer function again, and we'll call this logging decorator. And so the example here, what we're going to do is we're going to create some sort of pretend logging function that will print out some values to the console before and after we call our function that we're wrapping this decorator around. So this decorator will take in a function as an argument. Now for this inner function here, I'll create it and just call it inner function. And I want to go ahead and pass in args and quargs into here. And I made a video previously on these two arguments here. And so if you're unfamiliar, I'll link it in the description in case you need a quick video on what args and quargs are. But we'll need this in a second, and hopefully you'll see why. But now inside this function here, we want to go ahead and call the function as an argument. So we'll go ahead and just take the function and we'll pass in args and quargs. And what this will do is this will let us use any arguments passed into this function and just pass them in here as well. I'm going to set this to a variable called returned value. And then we can go ahead and add any of the other functionality we want here. But at the very end, we want to go ahead and return this returned value. And then we can go ahead and call the inner function, or return the inner function, I should say, without calling it, in our logging decorator function. Now let's add some pretend logging. So before the function, I'll just do something like logging before the function is called. And after, I'll create another print statement and do something like logging after the function is called. So if you wanted to put any logging before and after this function call, you can do it with this decorator by putting anything you want before and anything you want after. We're calling this function argument right here. Now this is our decorator. So this is what our decorator looks like when we define it and create it. We have our decorator. This will be the part we use with the @ symbol. And we have this inner function that wraps around the function that we're the function that we're wrapping our decorator around. And so then we're adding this extra functionality of these print statements around whatever this function is. So let's go ahead and try this out. The first thing we want to do is we want to use our @ symbol to use this decorator. We'll do logging decorator. Now the line exactly after this is we can go ahead and define a new function. I'll say add, and I'll do a comma b, and I'll go ahead and do a return a plus b. So we'll just add these two numbers together. Now down here, I can go ahead and print add 2 comma 2. Now if I run this, you'll see we have our logging before, our logging after, and then the result. Now you may be wondering why this result is put after and not instead of in between. And we look at this, it's because we're printing it down here at the very end. If we printed it up here, if we instead of printing this, we could delete this, and then we could print it right here, we can see that this is being called before the after print statement. So we do print a plus b, and then we call just add 2 and 2, come back here and run this. We then get logging before the function is called, for, and then logging after the function is called. So hopefully you can see what we're doing here with these print statements. We're taking this add function and we're wrapping it around this decorator with this syntax, with just some special Python syntax to wrap it with a decorator. We're wrapping it with additional functionality. In this case, all we're doing is we're printing these 2 extra lines to the console before and after we call this function. Now we could take this and make a more real example. So I'm going to go and just comment all this out, come down here, and I'm going to create another decorator. So let's do a def. We'll go ahead and do triple. And what we'll do with this one is we'll create the same way. We'll do a function, and then we'll go ahead and create an inner function, and we'll pass in args and quargs again. And just in case this part wasn't clear, up here, we have these 2 arguments. To be able to use these arguments, when we call it up here, we need args and quargs just to get any arguments that we have. We can pass them in here. So we just need that so we can get these arguments and still have them when we call it inside this inner function. But we can go ahead and add that again here, args and star quargs again. So now inside of this inner function, what we want to do is we want to call this function take the result and multiply it by 3. So we'll just triple the result. So I'm going to go ahead and do returned value equals, and we call that function argument with args and quargs to get the numbers that we're going to add together in this case. And then we're going to go ahead and return returned value times 3. And then down here, we can go ahead and return the inner function without calling it. And now down here, we can go ahead and once again use this decorator. So at triple, and I'll scroll down here so you have more space you can see hopefully. At triple, and then def add, once again, we'll create the same add function, A and B. And then here we'll go ahead and just return A plus B. And then down here, we can go ahead and print the result. Print add with, once again, 2 and 2. Save that. Come back to our terminal here. Run this file here, and we get 12. So we look at our result here. 2 plus 2 is 4. So this return value will be 4. We're then taking that return value, and we're multiplying by 3. So 4 times 3, we get 12. So we can do this with any number. We can go and change this. 2 and 8. And then once again, we run this and we get 30 because 2 plus 8 is 10 times 3, we get 30. So now what we're doing is we're taking this add function and now we're adding additional functionality to it with our decorator. If I comment this out, you can see that now we'll just get 10 when I run this function. So we're able to kind of modify the function without actually modifying the original function by adding these decorators. And so that's what we're doing with decorators. We're creating these, all it is a function that wraps around whatever function is below it. That's all we're doing. It's just kind of it's a little confusing at first to understand, but that's all we're really doing here. So once again, real quick, just to go over this line by line, in case you're still a little bit confused, we create a function, which is our decorator. This name will match this name. We're passing in a function as an argument. We then have an inner function, and we're passing args and quargs to get any of these functions or any of these arguments inside of this inner function as well. We can then call that function with args and quargs to call it with these arguments right here. And then we can do whatever we want, additional functionality, whatever modifications we want. In this case, we're multiplying the result by 3. So we're taking our result. In this case, this will be 10. And then 10 times 3, this will return 30. And then you need to return this inner function inside this outer function here so it actually returns the result. So this is just a line you need to make sure that happens. And then we can go ahead and use that decorator with this at syntax. And we pass in triple, which is our decorator name. These two match. We then create our function that we want to wrap this decorator around. So this def add function is now this argument right here, this func argument. We then take this function here, we go ahead and evaluate it, and so we're returning a plus b. So we take our two numbers, 2 plus 8, return 10. This is 10, multiply by 3, get 30, return the result. So that's all we're doing there. Hopefully that all made sense. If not, let me know and I'll try to explain a little bit more. But that is it for this video. I just want to do a quick video on how decorators work. All the code will be in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.